you just met someone. They told you their name 10 seconds ago, and it's already gone. Not because you weren't listening, not because you don't care. Something else happened in your brain in that exact moment, and once you understand what it is, you'll never feel embarrassed about forgetting a name again. Here's what most people assume. Forgetting names means you have a bad memory, or worse, that you weren't really paying attention to the person. But that's almost never the real reason. People who forget names easily often have completely normal, sometimes even above average memory in every other area of their life. They remember faces. They remember conversations. They remember tiny details about someone's life from years ago. So if the memory itself works fine, the problem isn't memory. The problem is what happens in the half second after you hear a name, and that half second reveals something surprisingly specific about how your brain prioritizes information. Let's start with the first reason, because it's the most common one and almost nobody knows it has a name. It's called the name-face dissociation effect. When you meet someone, your brain processes their face and their name through two completely different systems. Faces get processed visually and emotionally. Your brain is wired over millions of years to instantly read expressions, threat level, familiarity. Names, on the other hand, are pure arbitrary sound. There's no visual or emotional anchor to Kevin or Sarah. It's just a label your brain has to bolt onto a face with zero natural connection between the two. So in that first encounter, your brain is doing intense visual work reading expression, tone, body language, while the name gets dropped in almost as an afterthought, with nothing to stick to. But there's a second layer, and this one's a little more personal. A lot of people who forget names easily are actually high in something psychologists call social processing load. In the moment you're introduced to someone, your brain isn't just hearing a name, it's simultaneously managing eye contact, thinking about what to say next, reading the social context, and monitoring your own behavior. That's an enormous amount of mental bandwidth being spent in real time. The name, ironically, becomes the least urgent piece of information in that moment, because your brain is busy making sure the social interaction itself goes smoothly. People who are more socially anxious or more self-monitoring in conversations tend to forget names more, not because they care less, but because they're spending almost all their mental energy managing the interaction itself. Now here's where it gets interesting, because there's a trade-off hiding inside this pattern. The same mental bandwidth that's stealing attention away from the name is often being spent on something that actually matters more emotional read. People who forget names quickly often remember exactly how someone made them feel. They'll forget Daniel, but remember he had a warm laugh, or seemed nervous, or talked too fast. That's not a flaw. That's your brain making a judgment call about what's actually useful to remember long term, and in most relationships, how someone made you feel matters far more than the four-letter label attached to them. There's also a third, slightly less flattering reason, and it has to do with what's called first-instance encoding. Names only become memorable when they're repeated or used. The brain treats single exposure information as low priority. By default, it's a survival mechanism, because remembering everything you encounter once would be exhausting and mostly useless. Most people hear a name exactly once at an introduction and never say it out loud themselves. If you don't repeat the name within the first few seconds, your brain quietly files it as probably not important, and it gets pushed out almost immediately to make room for new information. This is why people who consciously repeat a name back nice to meet you, Daniel remember it dramatically more often. It's not a different memory. It's a different encoding process triggered by one extra second of effort. And this leads to something a lot of people don't expect. Forgetting names easily is sometimes linked to being more present, not less. People who are deeply focused on the emotional tone of a conversation, reading someone's mood, reacting authentically, staying engaged, often have less spare mental capacity left over for storing arbitrary data like a name. In a strange way, the people who forget names the fastest are sometimes the ones who are the most genuinely engaged with you as a person in that moment, not the label. So the next time you forget someone's name 30 seconds after they say it, understand what's actually happening. Your brain isn't failing. It's making a real-time decision about what matters most in a social moment. And a name disconnected, arbitrary, unrepeated almost always loses that competition to tone, expression, and feeling. And once you see memory this way, not as one system, but as a constant set of trade-offs your brain is making, without asking you, you start to notice these same trade-offs happening everywhere else in your daily life too. If this kind of breakdown clicked for you, there's a whole series of these quiet mental patterns most people never notice in themselves, and that's exactly what the next video is about.